Hi, Gail. We're letting everyone in now.
Okay, I'll just end it.
Thank you.
Okay, Shula, I'll start whenever you tell me.
Great. Let's just give another minute for everyone else to sign on, then we'll be ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, Gail, I think whenever you're ready, we can start.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We have our loyal every single time, and I'm deeply appreciative. I know we have a special guest today, but I do want to thank all of those who have participated every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. So thank you, and thank you to everybody who joined today. I am Gail Brewer. I am the Manhattan Borough President. And although I have no talent, I love the arts. And I want to say that it was similar. I know we went to the opening of the Apollo, and I like it when the police commissioner said he was very excited to be standing on the floor of the Apollo Theater, although he had no talent. So I certainly can understand. He has other kinds of talent. But anyway, New York City is, of course, no question, the heart and soul of all of the arts. And during this pandemic, I have to give credit to the unions, because I think some of you know that almost every day during the worst of the pandemic, to the credit of then Governor Cuomo, his staff met with all of the unions, all of the business people, 5 presidents, and others, small group, but maybe 20, 25 people every single day to see how we could come out of the pandemic and what the issues are. And I have to say that the unions, without fail, said every single time, you know, they did obviously talk about essential workers and so on, but they said the persons who were hurt the most are those in the arts. And they, I think when it was time for the federal government to come up with funding, and the commissioner will know more, were very specific about making sure that those workers in the arts, many of whom are not fortunate enough to have pensions or have any kinds of other funding, were able to get the federal dollars. And you can hear more as independent workers, they often, and gig workers, they often have a challenge. So I know we'll hear more about that, but I just want to say it is a really important issue. The second thing I want to say is about something that I've done, which has nothing to do with directly with funding. Just recently in a land use decision, we were working on a building on 43rd, 44th and Madison. It used to be the MTA headquarters. And it's being developed. It needed some changes in the zoning. And I think I was adamant, and I believe that the city council will do the same, that obviously they want to do a mural. Everybody wants to do a mural. And they obviously want, you know, they'll do some performing outside because they have a big open space based on the East Midtown rezoning. But I mandated, and I hope it sticks, 2 things. One is in the building, 500 to 1,000 square feet, free of charge for the arts. It could be performing arts, it could be even visual arts, kind of thing that Shoshana does on a regular basis. And that is going to be part of the building. And in addition, between retails in the ground floor, performing arts or visual arts will be allowed and be permitted and be, my hope, mandated to be part of that space. So anyway, I hope that in the future, we continue to make sure that the arts are part of every single rezoning. So I just throw that out, has nothing to do with budget per se. But we are challenged every single day by how much support we can give to the creative workers and to the arts ecosystem as this sector recovers from all the pandemic issues. And we'll hear more about Key to New York City Pass, which I don't know a lot about, but I'd love to hear about it. It has to do with getting these amazing workers a vaccine. I also want to mention thanks to Natalie Espino, who's on the call, that we have a Manhattan Art Survey. And we hope to have responses by the end of September. And we will try to give you some kind of a sense of what exists in the borough of Manhattan regarding the arts. Again, during the pandemic, particularly the Uptown arts groups led by the great Rosa Rivers, did have constant discussions. And even though money was, helped, there was a little bit of discussion from the foundations and the city and the state and the feds. Just the support mechanisms were phenomenal. We are in our office, so we have the Maggie Payton Gallery at 1 Center Street, and we're going to have in person a welcome back exhibit, which will feature work related to the pandemic. I don't know the exact, but I think submissions are due 9/13, that's September 13th, and then of course we will figure out the timing in terms of when it will be opening and how long it'll be running. So we're very excited about that. So a little bit on the arts. I want to just mention also, everywhere I go, I talk about arts education in the schools. I have spoken a lot recently at large events outdoors, and I always mention arts education, and it gets the biggest clap during the summer rising, which was, I call it summer school. The arts were front and center, and I swear to God, those kids showed up because of the arts. So I keep telling the principals, get the arts to be your focus. I don't know if they hear me. Our first speaker needs no introduction. We cannot see his shoes, but he has the best collection of shoes and sneakers in the whole city. And he is commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, Gonzalez. We're very honored to have him. He will tell you maybe some of the amazing institutions he has worked with and for in the past. But I know that he cares deeply about this sector and that he's beloved himself. But I think he would agree, although he can't say it, that the arts are never funded to the extent that they should be. Although I know I'll hear that the mayor has given more money to cultural affairs and never got it in the past. Never enough, in my book. And I do hope we can keep the borough, the schools have a lot of money from the federal government. And I sure hope that we can find a way to measure the arts, because years ago, because I've been around so long, there was a blue book effort, which meant that the principals had to fill out how much they are spending on the arts. And when money was tight, they would throw it to, with all due respect, math, reading, and writing. I got it. But the arts suffered. So I would love to see, as part of our, future, some kind of a measure on the arts and the arts education, because it could be cut short in a real instant with the way in which focus has to be on the other aspects of education. So anyway, welcome, Commissioner. Thank you very much. I know you're down there, Sheila Feinberg. We know Sheila very well, but you are really the commissioner. Go ahead, and the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Borough President. And you succeed where others have failed. You made me blush with that introduction, so thank you. And you may not have talents. I find it hard to believe that, but your biggest skill is the advocacy for arts and culture. And we are eternally thankful to you, because you not only are an advocate, but you walk the talk. Every time go to an event, the Borough President is there to support the arts and culture, and we thank you for that. I want to tell you, as a side note, based on what you were saying, we were very honored and happy to share out of the $25 million that we invested on artists through our City Artist Corps this summer. $6 million went to the Department of Education to commission over 200 murals and pop-up performances during Summer Rising. And you're going to start seeing the results of that very soon as we start finishing those murals. So we're very excited of that part of the, we're very excited of the whole program, but in particular for those artists that work with the schools.
And I've seen 3 of them, and they're beyond gorgeous. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, your team asked me to speak a little bit about the key to New York and sort of bring some information. I'll speak briefly, and maybe we can open the floor then for questions. So we're very, so we can answer, any information that folks don't have. As you mentioned, also with me is Sheila Feinberg, who is my deputy commissioner, who probably will gonna be, the friend that I call if there's an answer that I don't have. Very briefly, the key to New York City is a strategy and a policy to help us fight back against the Delta variants. As you, I'm sure, have been hearing, infections in New York City are rising again. A huge percentage, 99% of those that are being hospitalized are people that are not vaccinated, and most of them are infected with the Delta variant. The best weapon we have, or the best solution we have to fight back and to really, stop the curve for increasing, is to get as many people as we can vaccinated. Being vaccinated might not stop you from getting sick, but if you're vaccinated and you get sick, it would be just like having the flu, right? It won't send you to the hospital. And the more people we have vaccinated, the easiest is going to be to stop not only the spread, but also every time that we have a huge raise on infections in an area, a geographical area, we run the risk that the virus mutates again and creates another variant. So there are multiple reasons why we're rushing to get as many people vaccinated as we can. One of the strategies, because again, this is a timing issue, is to encourage as many people as we can to get vaccinated. Now that the Pfizer vaccine has been approved by the FDA, and there's no questions about the validity of that vaccine, is really sort of use the things that New Yorkers love the most, which is our restaurants, our sports, and of course our cultural organizations as an incentive. If you want to enjoy the life that New York City has to offer, you need to be vaccinated. So the mandate is pretty much asking everybody that enters an indoor dining experience, a sports experience, entertainment experience, arts and culture experience, will be asked to show proof of vaccination. If you are under 12 years old, in which the vaccine is still not applicable, parents, adults that are with those minors are going to ask to make sure that the minors are wearing face masks. And the same goes for those folks that are working in the establishments, and this applies to everything that is indoors, of course. We're going to be asking, starting September 13, that those that are working, in indoor dining, entertainment, arts and culture, sports, to be vaccinated. That's a little bit the gist of the whole mandate. And again, we wish we didn't have to do this. We wish that things were better, but if we don't raise to stop, the number of infections are increasing every day, we run the risk to bring back other restrictions that would be hurtful to, specifically in this case, I'm biased to the arts and culture sector, as you mentioned, Board President, before. We're just now seeing the performing arts reopening. It has been a year and a half since the performing arts closed. We're just now seeing, high-touch museums, those children museums, science, those are like, it's about experiences and touching and doing, trying to reopen. The worst thing that could happen is ask these folks again to close because we couldn't contain the virus.
Okay. So one of the questions, although, and people should put in the chat or just raise your hand, but I think you've answered it, but like sometimes arts organizations meet in a faith-based church, synagogue, mosque, etc. And often those services don't need to be, I don't know, they don't necessarily need to be vaccinated, or they may not ask. I know I've been to, unfortunately, like 3 funerals in the last, 3 weeks, and nobody said a word. So we just sit apart, and so far so good. But okay, so now you're there, you're a cultural. Do you have to ask for the same that you just described, et cetera, even though you're in a space that, to the best of my knowledge, is not asking? How does that get handled?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that come out from your question that are extremely important. One is there are exceptions to those patrons that are going to come to your cultural organization, to your the cultural experience that you offer in indoors. And there are exceptions for your employees. And those two exceptions fall under two categories. One is religious beliefs, and the other one is medical accommodations, right? And if any of your staffers, any of your patrons come to you and they say that they cannot be vaccinated because of religious beliefs, they cannot be vaccinated because of some medical issue, you are able to make an exemption and figure out, a reasonable accommodation. And we're leaving it to you to figure out what that reasonable accommodation is, based on the type of experience and the dynamics in which the program that you're offering looks like. So could it be, using face mask? Could it be, creating social distancing for that person or that group of people? You name it.
Okay.
The second answer to that question, which is more specific what you were asking, is if you are a cultural organization that doesn't have a presenting venue, right? And you just rent a church, you rent a school or space or something like that. You don't necessarily need to enforce these because you are under, sort of the policies of that space. However, if you, and I hear this a lot, mostly from performing arts organizations, it works in your advantage to make sure that your audiences know that you are asking folks to be vaccinated, because you're sending a message that those are going to be participating in that experience are going to be safe.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's an answer. I mean, I think, right now, if people refuse admission to unvaccinated, I guess they just have to figure it out on a case-by-case basis. I don't know how else to answer that, but that comes up. So it's not just in the arts, it's generally a hard question to answer. In the schools, because we are hopefully, if we follow what happened during the summer, hopefully there'll be a lot of teaching artists in the schools, I hope. And they're not DOE, they're teaching artists. And do they need to be vaccinated? And how will the school groups be handled? And how, that kind of issue, how does that work when you're coming from the outside?
So the teaching artists that work from a cultural organization that's providing services to school as contractors fall under the mandate for schools that was released probably a week and a half ago, in which everybody working at a school, every adult working in school, from contractors to employees to you name it, they all have to be vaccinated. So as the organizations that are here listening to us today are starting to talk to principals and starting to talk to superintendents about the services they're going to be providing to schools, they're going to ask you to show proof of vaccination for your teaching artists.
And I think you're going to, like, if there is an issue, not necessarily at the schools, but in the venue, for de-escalation, I understand you're going to be doing some kind of training on that issue. But
Yes.
People can be, go ahead.
I did send an email to the sector probably 2 weeks ago with a link to video training on de-escalation to help organizations to figure out how, some people don't like the idea of the mandate, some people don't like to be told what to do. And we know that we're asking, one more thing to the frontline workers in the cultural organizations to enforce. And we understand that some people might get, a little anxious or violent. So there's some links to some de-escalation training that we're offering as a city for those that need to do the enforcement.
Okay. I mean, I think they're just in the chat. This is, even though it's not an easy, it's just not easy to handle when you're there. Will there be any extra funding? I know everybody gets this question in the social services world, and I'm sure in the arts world, because you're going to have perhaps have extra staff, extra training. This is not just an easy thing to do. So I'm just wondering if there's any extra training for any of these really additional expenses for compliance, because it's not, there's papers, I'm sure there's paperwork to fill out, another person at the front, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering how that works with,
Unfortunately, Board of President, we don't have a designated fund to support these efforts. But for those that receive funding from Department of Cultural Affairs and that you're ready to do programming supported by us this year, if you want to include on the budget of that proposal the expense of enforcing this mandate, as we did last year, we're going to be very lenient this year in terms of how do you rethink a little bit your programming, how do you rethink your offering in order to accommodate to the situation. And that's the best we can do so far.
Okay, so I guess you have to keep explaining to people and having some kind of a training and information, because some people, even though they want to get vaccinated, they can't. So that would be the medical, and maybe it's clear to others exactly what it is for the protocol for that. What kind of note you get from the doctor, or that kind of thing. And I assume people under 12 can still go even though they're not vaccinated, because that's an obvious exception. I think you have to be, constantly giving people information as they hit the logjam of somebody who's got another reason for something. And we want people to experience arts. Go ahead.
A couple of things. One, I want to go back to a prior question you asked. We're still in the period of executing and not enforcing. Enforcement is going to start on September 13. What I highly advise, if you have somebody coming to your door, to your cultural organization, and they're not vaccinated, just to tell them, like starting, September 13, you can come in now, make sure you wear a mask, but starting September 13, this is something that is going to be enforceable. If for any reason you need a couple more weeks, in addition to start enforcing this mandate, that's totally fine. Let us know. But like at all times, we want to work with people and make sure that it's important to get vaccinated. We don't want to turn people off or get anybody upset or violent, and you be in the middle of that.
Go ahead, because it is hard. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just that, right? Like I know it's just there are some large organizations already enforcing it because of their scale. We want to make sure we give enough flexibility to the smaller organizations to figure out, how they can do this in a way that doesn't affect their business and also their funds.
Is there something called a registration log, Commissioner? Because I haven't heard that. Somebody from the Academy of Medicine, they have a huge, beautiful conference room where they're all the time in the past, and they're considered an entertainment setting, which I don't know how that's different, because I guess it's still a venue. So all the venues applications would apply, but they wanted to know what information is needed for the registration log. And if somebody from the, wants to come from this organization, jump in, because I don't know exactly what you mean. Feel free, go ahead. Julie, you have to help me. I can't,
Who's joining us from the Academy?
The Academy. Is there anybody here from the Academy?
Hi, I'm here. It's Ilana Kiefer from the New York Academy of Medicine.
Hi there.
And also from Image NYC. So we just wanted to, so I work with Sajal at the New York Academy of Medicine, and we have a lot of people kind of coming in for various events and conferences. So just kind of want to know, like, what if we're going to be tracking people, and Sajal, correct me if I'm wrong, as they come in, what kind of information do we need to collect for some type of log in terms of tracking who comes in related to their vaccine status for proof of vaccine?
I've never seen a log, Commissioner, so go ahead, and I'm everywhere every day.
This is the first time I hear about this. Sheila, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think you need to log any information. In the past, and many organizations are doing this just as a way of contact tracing. But what we're asking is people to ask for proof of ID and vaccination and proof of vaccination in order to get in. That's all.
But there doesn't need to be like any historical. Okay.
I haven't heard that.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be memorialized. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Right. That's a much better word. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Right, and then it's the usual question about, that I get all the time. extra funding is not going to be available. I hear this for the frontline workers, but they're afraid of those who get pushback when you're told to wear a mask. I don't know that there's any answer to that. And who's going to enforce the protocols after September 13th? Who's going to enforce that?
So from the city perspective, the city is borrowing staffers from different agencies that are used to enforce policies. And it is my understanding they're going to go around just making sure that this mandate is enforced. That said, and this has been said by the deputy mayor Bean, and I continue to send the same message. This is not about getting anybody in trouble. This is not about creating financial hardships to anyone. This is for all of us to really convey a sense of urgency to an emergency to New Yorkers, to say that like the clock is ticking, and we really need to increase the level of New Yorkers that are vaccinated if we want to have a fall season and winter in which we're not restricted in terms of what we can do in terms of arts, culture, entertainment, and hospitality.
Okay, I agree. It's hard when you're on the ground. You and I are not on the ground every minute, and it's hard.
Yeah.
Unless there are other questions. So the only other question I have, Commissioner, which is a little bit larger picture, it's funding. So is there more federal funding that's come to these groups? Is there more state funding? I know you have more city funding, just to give an overall sense of.
Yeah. I think for the first time, since we know each other, which has been many years, I'm gonna contradict you. I am going to say that there's not enough funding for the arts and culture, even though the budget this year for arts and culture is a historical high. We always need more, and it's not enough. And I understand that the state has put an extra $100 million through NISCA to distribute among cultural organizations. I would just pay attention and look at that. Okay. And I don't know what's happening with the federal government. I know that there's some stimulus packages added to the infrastructure bill, but I still don't know exactly how it's going to affect.
It hasn't passed yet. It hasn't passed yet. Yeah. And Shutter brought money enough. Some Shutter the venue, whatever the venue Shutter. I never know what these programs are.
Yeah, called. The Shutter venue operators. Yes. I mean, there was the 2 rounds of PPP. There was the Shutter venue, Shutter
and Save Our Stages.
Yeah. But we always need more.
No, I agree. And I'm hoping that the DOE will help, because they do have enough money. Oh my goodness, they got a lot of federal money. So any other questions for the Commissioner, Shula?
I had a question at the follow-up on, and I did put many links into the chat for the Key to NYC, and one of the things on the Key to NYC page is a template for a form that venues can keep on how they're complying, where they display their signs, what methodology they're using. But I just wanted to ask a question, a few things that I've RSVP'd for already. They asked for me to send electronically a copy of my vaccination records. And I'm wondering, is that something that's allowed? And even if it's allowed, is it advisable for a presenter to be collecting that information?
And this is something that I was confused until very recently myself. And before I answer that, I want to just tell you that in addition to information about the signs that you could put in your organization, it's already designed by the Department of Health. You can grab that information and design it to your liking. But also you have a Q&A with a lot of answers, frequently asked questions with a lot of answers that is updated weekly. So rather than just download the PDF and stick to that, I encourage you that you check that weekly, because there might be some changes. Now, Natalie, to your question, is the HIPAA rules, what prohibits is from a third party to share your medical information with somebody else, right? Nothing stops us from each of us to ask somebody about their medical information. It's up to them if they want to share it or not. And it's up to you what you do if that person decides not to share it. So if somebody asks you for proof of vaccination, and that is to allow you to enjoy one of these experiences, that's totally fine. They can do that and they can collect it. What they cannot do is share it with somebody else.
Thank you. And
All right, Barbara, you had a question quickly?
Yeah,
Wanda?
are we still doing tracing? I know you mentioned tracing, I didn't hear it. Are you not collecting phone numbers? There was a period if you went inside a restaurant, you had to give your phone number and the time that you were there. Are we not doing that anymore? I went to an event where it turns out somebody was positive and it was only word of mouth. It wasn't through the usual tracing way that we found out about it.
I'm not sure about that. I'm going to find out, and we're going to get back to the Board of Presidents and staff so they can let you know what's
Thank
happening
you.
with that.
Okay. All right, Commissioner.
But Barbara, sorry, Board of
No, go
Presidents,
ahead.
Barbara and everybody else, right? You know, the mandate only goes so far. Of course, if you are concerned about your safety and the safety of your staffers, the safety of your visitors or audiences, you can always go above and beyond the mandate, right? I think the mandate now is asking for proof of vaccination of only 1 dose. If you want to do contact tracing, if you, in addition to proof of vaccination, you want to mandate mask, you know, anything that you think it would make you and, you know, your constituents and your staff safer, you go for it, right? Nobody's going to stop you on that.
Liz Ritter, you had a quick question, and then we're going to go to the next speaker. Liz, go ahead.
Thank you. So my question relates to the confidentiality of the proof of vaccination. I understand that, of course, you shouldn't share that information, but if somebody says, for example, is everyone vaccinated? And you say, yes, everyone has submitted their proof of vaccination. If a person has a list of the people who are attending and knows that they've all submitted their proof of vaccination, you've just communicated that all of those people have been vaccinated. So is that a violation of confidentiality or not?
I don't know. I mean, that's a question for a legal counsel.
Yes, it is, which is why I'm asking it, and I'm hoping that somebody's legal counsel will get back to us with an answer.
We can get back to you, Liz. We can get back to you. All right,
Yeah.
Commissioner, thank you very much. And we love working with you, and we will continue supporting the arts. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you, everyone, and be safe. Bye.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amy Folderoff. She's the Managing Director of the League of Independent Theater, and it's a wonderful organization. It brings together all the independent theaters and all their voices and their interests. So Amy, go ahead. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, it's always so good to see Commissioner Casals and to see you, Borough President Brewer. I appreciate it. And we love to see arts policy reflected in every element of city policy. And so that's why we especially thank you for pushing for that benefit agreement for the building on Madison. It's those things that really are the engine of making arts policy in New York work when we can get it operating on all cylinders. So thank you for that. I was asked to speak about how our venues are doing with relief funding. So far, about 6% of our member venues have permanently closed due to the COVID-19 crisis. We know that that won't be the final number. That's just what we can report so far. We also have a number of venues who have lost their physical space but are continuing to exist in the cyber realm. So we're not quite sure how to count those yet. Those numbers will settle eventually. So funding so far has been a Band-Aid to a crisis, which I know we all understand is ongoing. I decided to check in with one of our venues who is...
Amy, you're fading out a little bit, but I can hear you, but you're just fading out a little bit.
Right.
So go ahead.
Maybe I can keep talking while I plug this in. So I checked with a venue that's really an exemplary...
Much better, go ahead.
They got their SVOG money, their PPE, their EIDL, their NISCA rapid grants. They are fully booked through the end of the year, and they've been producing throughout the entire pandemic. So this is an organization that's really done absolutely everything they can. And the reality is, they said that they will maybe make it through the winter. And if they don't get more funding, they will close early next year. So they need more grants. They need to be able to pay back, especially the rent that is due, back rent. I mean, and this is the A+ exception. We are really great at navigating all of these things sort of organization. Most indie artists and venues don't have a full-time staff or the capacity to dedicate 40 hours a week towards getting these funds. They're just struggling to stay above water. So this is really a crisis for our community. We need grants specifically for small nonprofit organizations. As you've alluded to, the money is there. The Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, despite all the hiccups in the rolling out, it was a great thing to get some funds into the hands of venue operators, but it really prioritized commercial and for-profit ecosystems. The nonprofit organizations were deprioritized and were pushed back to the second and third tier of eligibility when they had funds in the first tier and they were searching for people to give it to, but they couldn't give it to the nonprofits until further down the line. So the nonprofits ended up having to wait. That's a really oversimplification of what happened, but it is an example of why we need specific funding for the nonprofit sector to help these venues. The $800 million small business grant specifically excludes nonprofits. There is enough money there. There is funding there, so much funding that they're now lifting the cap to include for-profit organizations that have revenues of up to $2.5 million, but they still are not able to give that money to nonprofits. So the line between small business and small art is really a false one. Indie venues are small businesses. So we need to get those funds. Things that have worked really well have been the increased flexibility and accessibility. So I want to thank all of the people in city government who've been working so hard to make those changes happening. Simplifying the application process is a lot harder to do than to say, but it has really increased equitable access to all kinds of organizations. Something that I think is really important that bears repeating is that indie organizations and small arts organizations are not shrunken down versions of large institutions. We work differently, we have different goals. So this simplification and this open flexibility in the application processes is a huge and much needed step in creating systems that address that reality. We're mom and pops and mom and pop shops. We don't have big departments. We can't spend 40 hours of labor filling out forms and tracking applications. So the programs like the City Artist Corps, fantastic. We need more of that. That was wonderful. And all of the work that went into that is so appreciated. Funds that are unrestricted. We can't plan more than a few months in advance in this reality. So having unrestricted flexible funding is key. Speaking of the city artist grants, I would actually love to expand them perhaps into a space or venues grant, maybe in a larger dollar amount so that we can provide venues with money to give artists space for free to work, because we know space is the #1 barrier to getting work created in New York City. We need a small arts group that's analogous to the CIGs with the same benefits and access. And yes, that means I do want the city to buy or give space to small arts groups, like a bunch of little citywide Warhol factories in every neighborhood. I would love to see that happen. And we need our arts policymakers to get behind bills like Intro 1796. This is not a specific to artists bill. It's not about funding, but it's about commercial rent stabilization. And if we could get commercial rent stabilization, that will really go a long way towards creating a direct impact, saving our spaces, giving our venue owners a fair shake, and helping them stay in the communities that they are so important to. So I could talk all afternoon about what's important for small arts venues, but that's sort of the overview of my organization's feedback that we've been getting from our venues about what we need in terms of funding. Basically, more funding. The funding is out there. We need creative funding. We need easy, accessible, flexible funding, which I know that the people on this call, Commissioner Casals and Borough President Brewer, understand. We've had many conversations about it, and I thank you for your work towards that. But we've already seen such a positive impact with the flexible, easily accessible grants that I would love to keep that going. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amy. Two quick questions. One is the commissioner mentioned about the NISCA funding. I don't know if that's relevant, so I'd like to hear about that in terms of the state funding, whether that is applicable to your wonderful organizations. And then second, we just had a long discussion about venues and admittance and COVID and so on and so forth. So I guess those are my two questions. How are your organizations handling that? Were any of the questions that were asked today relevant, etc.? So funding and I guess you'd call it COVID.
Sure. I think the NISCA funding is something that a lot of our organizations take advantage of, but a lot of our organizations are sort of too small to qualify for some case-by-case basis, but they have been doing, like the rapid grants have been really helpful for some venues. Okay. But we have a lot of organizations that are what you would call like itinerant venues or itinerant organizations. They exist for a particular project, but they don't necessarily have a home. Those organizations you were talking about that use other spaces, other cultural spaces to present their work. So yes, we like NISCA's move towards more accessibility, and we know that that has been something they've been working hard on this year, and we're going to keep pushing too for that. In terms of the
COVID law, the COVID world, yeah.
There's so much that is an ongoing discussion. A lot of the questions, I want to thank you for bringing up such smart questions about it. It is clear that the goal of the program is to incentivize vaccinations. Get it. Great. I think a lot of organizations were hoping for more of a plan for how to protect our artists and our patrons, which is where there's a little frustration coming because we're trying to figure out exactly what is this protocol, what does this process mean? And I think all of these questions are questions that we're still trying to figure out. We're trying to come up with a consensus across the community. I was in a panel last week with about 50 theater makers, and there's such confusion and such a range of plans because every venue's plan is based solely on what they have capacity to do. Some are saying, you know what, if you flash me your card, I'm just going to wave you in. Others are saying, well, we're going to try to contact trace. Some are saying, wait, I thought we still had to socially distance. And there is no real consensus because it's also based on what each individual organization can do while they're trying to keep their arts organization afloat and present these cultural activities for their community that they're trying to serve, which really should be their priority. So anything that the city can do to create an even playing field so that there is support, so that all of the cultural organizations can have sort of a similar capacity and we can come to a consensus will be so key. I believe either you or the commissioner touched on it, but it is so important that audiences know what to expect, that they are able to buy into that deal that they make with cultural organizations when they show up to a space, and that we can make good on that and they can trust us and we can trust them. And if audiences don't know what to expect because every place they go is something different, that's where we're going to run into trouble with patrons being very upset. There is a real concern that our staff members, who are often volunteers, or the director or the ASM who is helping to get the people in the seat before they run backstage, that are doing triple and quadruple duty, are not going to be able to then also deal with an irate patron who doesn't know what to expect. So I do appreciate the de-escalation trainings. We're going to push those out to our members. But I think we also, any funding. I understand funding. It's hard to come by, but it's there. We need funding to hire more staff, hire security. I think one of the questions that comes up is liability. You know, what if a patron decides to sue one of these arts organizations? Does the city have any sort of support for us in terms of what is our liability when we are implementing the city's plan? So there is, I think that time will help, but time is also running short as we figure this out.
That's very helpful. And Natalie's question, I've been at a lot of venues recently, and you show I happen to know how to use my app, so I just show it. But not everybody does, even that. Just the technology for some people is a challenge. I got it. So they bring their card, you check the card, you check the app. I've never heard what Natalie had to deal with. So that would be another example of what is the guidance, So
yeah.
So thank you. Okay, are there any other questions for Amy? I think you're getting a lot of support about we need funding and we need to protect everybody. And
I would also like to throw in perhaps an idea that's been kicking around is a hotline or a way to report when a venue does have a problem. A hotline or an email address or some point of contact that we could go to for the city would be helpful.
Good question. Okay, that's a good idea. There are more questions than answers in many cases.
Right now, yes.
Amy, thank you very, very much for all your work. Our next speaker is Cecilia Bukowski. She's from Dance NYC, and I know the organization well, and you are certainly a promoter of this great performance. I have to say, just last week, I went to, it's called BAND, B-A-A-A-N-D at Lincoln Center, and there were like 5 different companies, and that stupid rain showed up about, 3 companies in. And some of us, none of us had umbrellas, at least I didn't, but we waited it out and the dance continued. And there's so many wonderful dance programs. So Sarah, go ahead, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much for having me. And I went to some of the band performances and some stuff on Little Island last week for sure. And it's been really great to see live performance coming back in this outdoor capacity as we can. Of course, as the weather gets colder, that's going to decline a little bit. Dancers dancing in the cold, not going to happen so much. So for sure, I echo a lot of what was said on this call earlier, the questions about Key to NYC and everything that Amy shared as well about the challenges that small organizations are facing. Dance NYC is dedicated to serving the New York City dance workforce through a lens of justice, equity, and inclusion. And we really focus on specifically communities of color and other marginalized communities such as disabled dance workers and immigrant dance workers. So we're trying to center their concerns in this as well. And I'll note that just like everything that I share is specifically through the dance lens, although a lot of these things apply to the wider arts and culture sector as well. So what Dance NYC is really aiming for is to push beyond relief and recovery and sort of think into the future for a thriving dance ecology where dance workers can make dance with dignity. They can pay dignified wages to their workers and collaborators and remain generative artists who can create and sustain their work over time. That's not something that I think dance workers have been able to do even before the pandemic, and things have definitely gotten worse over the last year and a half. We've launched a campaign called Artists Are Necessary Workers. This was in May of last year to help support arts work as dignified labor. I've dropped the link into the chat there. We also host field-wide calls to address questions, needs, and plans for the future of dance. I'll note that next week on September 9th, that's Thursday, we'll hold a call to address the Key to NYC guidance directly from the perspective of the dance community and share on some reopening experiences for independent venues. We're also planning in the coming weeks to host a Vaccines for Dancers town hall with a panel of doctors who will be disseminating information on the vaccines with a specific lens for dance workers. These calls are open to the public with registration, so I'll drop links in the chat for that as well. In February of this year, we launched a reopening toolkit, Reopening Dance in New York City. This is a website that was developed with guidance from the city and New York Forward, CDC, WHO. And we're in the process right now of making updates to reflect the Key to NYC guidance. We've just made a round of updates earlier in the summer. And of course, as things shift, we're continually having to renew those updates. We do have a pretty comprehensive list of resources around vaccination and Key to NYC that have been updated, so you can check that out. In addition to these offerings, we also conduct independent research on the dance field. We held 3 rounds of a coronavirus dance impact study to look at the impact of the pandemic on the field, both at looking at arts organizations, groups, and projects, and at independent dance workers. Couple links for the study and the informational brief that we released earlier this year. And of course, we're seeing budgets contracting by over a quarter overall and by nearly half for smaller organizations, with facility operators having the highest earned revenue loss. And this is particularly relevant to Key to NYC because it affects these facility operators and impacts smaller organizations probably the most. We're also tracking organizational closures, and we're aware of at least 24 organizations and facilities that have permanently closed due to the pandemic. And the majority of these were studio facilities or other small businesses that were really beacons in their communities for the arts and dance. For individual dance workers, we're seeing just a really wide exacerbation of problems that existed before the pandemic, such as a low average annual income for individual dance workers. We're looking at under $33,000 a year. That's very near the poverty line and survivability for New York City. Cumulative losses just keep mounting into the millions of dollars, thousands and thousands of canceled engagements, and we're looking at even more in the future. In terms of equity, we're seeing disproportionate needs and impacts for dance workers who identify as disabled, as people of color, genderqueer and non-binary folks, as well as dance workers who are older, who are parents, and who are immigrants. And while some of the need for things like housing and food have decreased over the last several months, the need for salaries and wages has increased, as well as the need for mental health and IT resources to support health and well-being and to support the shift to virtual programming for dance workers that have not traditionally worked in that capacity. We're also seeing some shifts in the field that are kind of disconcerting, where over half of dance workers are now employed in some capacity outside the field. That's compared to just a third of dance workers reporting that even last year. And about half of dancers are considering long-term career options outside of dance, which is kind of heartbreaking because it indicates to me that even dance workers themselves don't see their field as sustainable. So all of this, along with the ongoing affordability crisis in New York City, inequities in the field, and the absence of things like robust unionization and wage standards, has really left dance workers vulnerable. And this is particularly relevant now with this Key to NYC guidance coming into play for disabled dance workers who are experiencing barriers to participation, whether they're disabled, immunosuppressed, and also for immigrant dance workers, particularly undocumented people who are facing concerns around tracking and monitoring systems and the use of third-party apps for vaccine mandates and contact tracing, things like that. I've been to a lot of these forums and have been collecting a lot of questions around Key to NYC, and I think a lot of them were addressed today. We'll address some more of them next week as well. I know I saw in a recent executive order that there is an exception for non-resident performing artists that was updated into the guidance. And that's something that I think will raise more questions within the field of like just how you enforce that, what the parameters are. And of course, whether these requirements are going to be combined with mitigating measures like masking, capacity limitations, and testing, so that there's an expectation of how long this blanket vaccine mandate will be in place, right? all the financial concerns that were raised, I echo all of those. And I can also say that the financial losses and concerns are just one part of the equation. The experiential losses are even larger for youth programs, for public programming, and specifically for small organizations in areas of the city with low vaccination rates, which correlate overwhelmingly with low income and communities of color, right? So if these organizations have to limit their programming or close their doors again because they can't comply with this mandate, then these organizations and their surrounding communities and neighborhoods need to be supported. So some of that support, I know funding is a difficult thing to wrap our heads around right now, but if there are resources somewhere for capital and operational costs related to implementing this program, how can those be prioritized to small budget organizations and to those operating in the most impacted zip codes in the city, right? I definitely echo the small business relief eligibility. Expanding that to include nonprofit cultural organizations would make a big difference for a lot of these small businesses. Let's see. I think that's about all I have. I'll just close by saying that the arts were some of the first to shut down, some of the last to reopen. We're really critical to rebuilding this city. And while relief and recovery are really pressing and important right now, we need to push beyond that as well, even as we're going through this process, and think of all of this through the lens of justice and sustainability, so that this dance ecology and the arts and culture sector in general can really thrive moving forward. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. And at least I think we're coming out of today between a hotline, business funding to go to the nonprofits, clarity on the vaccine for the arts, whatever, because there are more questions than answers in what you and Amy have come up with. And then of course, all the youth programs and what exactly is the exception for non-residents and the enforcement, etc. So I really appreciate it. We'll put all this in a letter, not to say that we'll get answers that are perfect, but we'll put it in a letter, trying to, I think it's helpful for the city agencies too, to have something in writing that says these are the questions that have come up. So and then we'll run it by you, both of you, to see if we've covered everything. These are huge issues. I have no idea how long, nobody knows how long this is going to go on. One other question I have, I'm so focused on the schools. I'm like a seeing eye dog. I just go right for the schools. And recently I used some funding to build a dance floor in a school. Obviously the school had enough space, but I'm just trying to tell you that those schools have money. So, it'll be something to try giving, working as much as you can, because not only there's all the reasons to do dance, but you're also building audiences, which is also equally important. So it's something to think about, trying to, within your, whatever scope you want to define, is there a dance floor? Because you know better than I, but I know enough to know there's floors and then there's a dance floor, and they're not the same thing. So does it have the spring? Does it have this? Does it have that? Blah, blah, blah. So it'll be worth, pushing some of these schools. All they have to do is ask the elected officials, but they don't think that way. So anyway, something to think about in general. I think the more that we hear from your community, not only about expense funding, which is obvious, which is what you're talking about, but also capital funding for, the notion that I came up with for these buildings that are going through ULURP. And then in addition, the schools and any public space should have an arts component. But I have to say, you never hear that from anybody. So that's something to add to your list. Never do I ever get a call from an arts organization stating this building should have an arts component. So you might want to put that on the list to try to add. I've never gotten a call to that effect. I push it, but I've never heard from anybody who wants it. You see a building going up, I mean, maybe we could change the law so that is part of every single building. I can't get affordable housing in every building, I've tried. But maybe we could get space where every new building has to have and it has to be free or low, otherwise what's the point? So something to add to your
I
list.
Appreciate that. The like a % for art sort of campaign.
Yeah, % for art is the sculpture, public art. Yes, usually not the performing, anything that costs money, it doesn't cost money. And so what I'm saying is I'm actually cutting into the bottom line. For separate art doesn't cut into the bottom. It's usually like a mural or outdoor sculpture, which is great. You need that. But I'm talking about cutting into the bottom line, which is a little bit different. Yes, something like that, but it would be structured differently. Okay, so are there other, that was an excellent oversight. Schuler, are there more questions that we should be answering, or anybody else have questions about dance?
Let's give everyone a minute, but otherwise it looks like we do have questions in the chat. We're going to follow up with the agencies and also we'll share them with Amy and Sarah as well and get back to everyone in addition to the letter Gail talked about.
Okay. All right, I think, go ahead, yep.
Madam Borough President, thank you. This is Monique
Yes, Monique,
Arden
go ahead.
Cordero. I just a quick comment. I mean, everything that was said, it was so powerful to me as a fellow artist. I mean, the communities.
And a community board member too, may I add. Go ahead.
Yes, that's true as well. But you know, my heart, you know, as an artist is breaking, and the communities that are being affected in terms of the economic impact and such are the ones that are also being affected in terms of trying to bring everybody back because these particular areas are suffering. And, you know, I'm just like so disheartened. I mean, I hear there's money, but the money's not getting to these organizations fast enough to help them. And I feel like, you know, I was on a call a few weeks ago, heard the same thing, and I keep hearing the same thing. And I'm wondering, what can we do to help the organizations get the money so that they can survive and our communities can thrive again?
I don't know who can even begin to answer that, either Amy or Sarah, but I think she's representing others, but it's hard. Go ahead, Amy, if you want to give it a shot.
I'm going to admit that I was writing a note in the comments about the community benefit agreement, so I did not hear the entire question, but I heard her heart coming through, and I heard her heart was breaking, and I heard her discuss saying that, yeah, there is a real disconnect between there is money out there, but how do we get money into the arts? Would you like to repeat your question so I can answer it better?
No, I mean, I think you got the gist of it. How do we get money to the small organizations that are in our communities that need that art to help us come back and thrive? I mean, we're 3 weeks in and we're still having the same question. Why isn't the money getting to the organizations, and what can we do to make that happen before we have further languishing?
Yeah, singing my song. I mean, I feel a lot of it, it is a shift in thinking it is somewhat happening, but we need to stop thinking of small arts organizations as tiny institutions and thinking about like what works for the big institutions and then just hoping that it trickles down to the small arts organizations and make that shift so that we're supporting the small arts organizations into a trickle up arts economy.
That's right. I heard you. That was clear. So how do we make that shift to make it happen?
You're on this call. This is part of it. You know, getting, yeah.
Monique, I know that, you know, were part of those calls during the pandemic of the Uptown nonprofits, and we could do more of those if they're helpful. Sometimes there is something happening, but nobody knows about it. So we can keep talking.
Okay, thank you.
We all know that when you have an arts organization in a community, they are the economic engine often for that community.
That's correct.
That they play a role. So. All right, I think it's 4 o'clock and we try to keep an hour. So I want to thank our two amazing speakers. Thank you, Sarah and Amy. And we will follow up with all the great questions and try to get you some answers. And we will do a letter about some of these. So thank you, everybody. Congratulations. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.